December 15th, 1996, in the cold industrial heart of Baltimore, Maryland, police officers followed a quiet, heavy-set man to the back lot of a wooden pallet factory. The man was Joseph Roy Metheny. Locals called him Tiny, a nickname that mocked his size, well over 6 feet tall and more than 500 pounds. What the officers expected that day was a tip on a missing woman. What they got was a confession so grotesque it would turn stomachs across the country. Metheny calmly pointed to a patch of ground and told them a woman was buried beneath it. Then, as if reciting a grocery list, he confessed to several more murders, and then, in the same breath, he claimed he had served human meat to strangers, grilled, seasoned, and disguised as pork sandwiches, sold from a roadside stand. No panic, no remorse, just a man walking them through his crimes, like a tour guide of the macabre. That moment marked the beginning of one of the most disturbing cases in Maryland's history. But to understand how a man like Joseph Metheny could walk among us, unnoticed for so long, we need to go back, before the confessions, before the graves, and before the meat turned cold. Behind Joseph Metheny's twisted stories were real women, and no matter how many bodies he claimed, only 2 were confirmed. 2 women whose lives he ended, 2 names police could verify, 2 tragedies that proved the horror wasn't just in his head. The first was Kathy Ann Magaziner, a 39-year-old sex worker who vanished in 1994. She struggled with addiction and lived on the edge of Baltimore's streets, just the kind of person Metheny admitted to targeting. He said he lured her to his trailer, strangled her, and buried her in a shallow grave behind the pallet factory. Then, a year later, he dug her up, removed her skull, and kept it in a box. When police asked why, he shrugged. No remorse, no explanation, just silence. The second confirmed victim was Kimberly Lynn Spicer, 23 years old. Metheny stabbed her in late 1996 and buried her behind the same factory. This time, he was sloppy. He asked a co-worker to help move the body. The man went to the police. That decision cracked the case wide open, and there was one more name, Rita Kemper, the woman who got away. Metheny had lured her to his trailer for drugs, but when she tried to leave, he locked the door, beat her, and attempted to rape her. She escaped through a window and ran barefoot through the freezing woods to safety. Her report confirmed what detectives feared. This wasn't some wild story. Metheny was a real threat, a predator who used drugs as bait and buried his victims where he worked. Out of the many he claimed to have killed, only Kathy and Kimberly were found, but their stories and Rita's escape were enough to reveal the truth. Joseph Metheny didn't just want to kill, he wanted control, and when his victims vanished, he believed no one would notice. For years, he was right. With 2 confirmed murders and 1 attempted assault on record, Joseph Metheny was already a monster. But then he said something that made seasoned detectives stop cold. He claimed he didn't bury every body. Some of them, he said, he butchered. He told investigators that after dismembering his victims, he stored their flesh in Tupperware containers in his trailer. Then he mixed it with pork, grilled it, and served it at a roadside barbecue stand just off the highway. It tastes like pork, he said. No one ever knew the difference. That one line was enough to hijack the headlines. Overnight, Metheny wasn't just a killer, he was the cannibal killer, the man who fed his victims to strangers. But here's the problem. Police couldn't prove it. They searched the area where the food stand allegedly operated. There was no human DNA, no customer complaints, no trace of remains, no body parts in the freezer, no meat grinder, nothing. Still, the story spread like wildfire. News outlets ran with it. Memes circulated. Podcasts, documentaries, and true crime specials used it as a chilling punchline. But in the interrogation room, officers started to see a pattern. Metheny confessed to everything. Too much. He said he killed homeless men with an axe and dumped them in rivers. He said he murdered up to 10 people and lost count. He said he served humans on buns to truckers. But with every confession, evidence thinned. It became clear some of what Metheny said was true, and some was performance, and that's what made him terrifying. He wasn't just trying to shock the police. He wanted to shape the story. He wanted to be more than a murderer. He wanted to be a legend, and in many ways, he got exactly what he wanted. Even today, people remember the sandwiches more than the victims. The myth of the meat stand overshadowed the real horror, the women who were buried in silence behind a factory wall. Joseph Metheny didn't need proof. He just needed attention, and he got it, in headlines, in documentaries, and in nightmares. By the time Joseph Metheny finished talking, police didn't know what was more disturbing, the things he confessed to, or the way he confessed them. He smiled through details most people couldn't even imagine. He laughed as he recalled stabbing, strangling, and mutilating women. He described each act with the calmness of a man reading a menu. But words only go so far. The justice system needed evidence, and that's what they had. In 1997, Metheny was charged with the murder of Kimberly Lynn Spicer and later Kathy Ann Magaziner. The courts were careful. They separated the provable from the speculative. No charges related to cannibalism. No charges for the many other bodies he claimed. Only what could be proven. He was found guilty of Spicer's murder in 1998. The court sentenced him to death. But that wasn't the end. In 2000, Maryland's highest court overturned a death sentence, ruling that robbery, the aggravating factor used to justify the penalty, wasn't strongly tied to the murder itself. Without that link, execution was off the table. Instead, Joseph Metheny was resentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. For Kathy Magaziner's murder, he received a second life sentence, and for the assault on Rita Kemper, the woman who escaped, he got 50 more years. But no sentence could match the horror of his crimes, and no prison walls could contain the disturbing legacy he left behind. In interviews, Metheny doubled down. He took pride in what he'd done. He said he didn't regret killing. He said the only thing he regretted was getting caught. He lived out his years at the Western Correctional Institution in Cumberland, Maryland. Behind bars, he gained a kind of twisted fame. He was featured in documentaries, podcasts, news segments, always referred to as the Cannibal, even though no court ever confirmed it. He gave interviews, repeated his gruesome confessions, and smiled while doing it. And then, on August 5th, 2017, prison guards found Joseph Metheny dead in his cell. There was no foul play, no final statement. He died the way he lived most of his life, quietly, in the background, surrounded by shadows. No memorial, no one claimed the body. Just a quiet end for a man who built his legacy on the backs of the forgotten. But for his victims, for Kathy, for Kimberly, and for the countless others who may never be found, his death didn't bring closure. It just brought silence. In the next chapter, we explore the man behind the myth, his mental state, his obsession with attention, and how Joseph Metheny became a legend in America's darkest corners. Joseph Metheny didn't kill in secret. He confessed, in detail, again and again. He wanted you to hear it. He wanted you to feel sick. But was he telling the truth? That's the question that haunts this case more than any missing body or unproven claim. Was Joseph Metheny a remorseless killer driven by rage and addiction, or a manipulative narcissist who exaggerated his crimes to become a legend? From the start, detectives noticed something strange about the way he spoke. He never stuttered, never flinched. He described horrific acts like someone reading off a grocery list. And then he'd smile. He once said, "I killed so many people, I lost count." But only 2 murders were confirmed, only 2 graves were found. He claimed to have dismembered bodies and stored human flesh in his trailer. He claimed to have served it to unsuspecting truckers as barbecue, but police found no remains, no meat grinder, no DNA, no evidence. And yet, Metheny kept insisting it was all true. He gave the media everything it needed to turn him into a dark legend, the cannibal killer of Baltimore. But here's what makes him more dangerous than most. He knew how to control the narrative. He knew how to say just enough to make people believe. And he understood something few killers do. In true crime, myth lasts longer than fact. He knew his victims were easy to forget. Addicts, sex workers, the unhoused. He knew no one would fight for their names. So he made himself the center of the story. And it worked. Documentaries focused more on the cannibalism than on Kathy Magaziner or Kimberly Spicer. Podcasts played up the barbecue angle. News outlets ran the most shocking sound bites, the rope, the skull, the sandwiches. In the process, Joseph Metheny became more than a killer. He became a character. And that may have been the goal all along, to make people remember him, to become a walking horror story, to make sure that even after death, his name wouldn't fade, even if his victims' names did. So, was he a monster? Yes, without question. He murdered, he raped, he mutilated. He laughed about it. He fantasized about it. But was he also a myth maker? Absolutely. And that's what makes him terrifying. Because whether the grill ever served human meat or not, he convinced the world it did. On August 5th, 2017, prison guards found Joseph Roy Metheny dead in his cell at the Western Correctional Institution in Cumberland, Maryland. No one had heard a struggle. No one had seen a fight. There were no signs of trauma, no suspicious activity. He simply stopped breathing. At 62 years old, the man who called himself a cannibal, who confessed to murders most could barely imagine, died alone, behind concrete walls, steel bars, and a legacy soaked in blood and doubt. There was no funeral. No family came forward. His body went unclaimed. Just like that, the story ended, but the questions never did. To this day, only 2 murders were proven, 2 lives taken with brutal certainty. The others, no bodies, no names, no evidence, just words. Words from a man who may have told the truth or may have built a legacy on lies. That's the part that stays with you. Because while Joseph Metheny is gone, his shadow still lingers in crime forums, documentaries, podcast titles, and late-night YouTube spirals. Not for the victims, not for the impact, but for the shock. People remember the sandwich, the Tupperware, the roadside grill, but they forget Kathy Magaziner, whose skull he unearthed like it was nothing. They forget Kimberly Spicer, stabbed and discarded behind his workplace. They forget Rita Kemper, who ran through the woods, barefoot, bloodied and freezing, but lived. These were real women, and they are the only truth we can hold on to. In the end, Joseph Metheny got what he wanted. He wasn't buried in an unmarked grave. He was etched into folklore as the man who might have fed humans to strangers. And maybe that was the final act of control, because monsters like Metheny don't just want to kill. They want to be remembered. And he was.